So let's talk about a story of faith and rebellion. It's about a clash of worlds that, believe me, shook the Catholic Church right to its very foundations. I mean, what happens when priests become factory workers? I know, it sounds like the setup for a punchline, right? But this was a real-life, incredibly radical experiment in post-war France. And, well, it had some pretty tragic consequences.
And how do we know about this? We're diving into this forgotten rebellion thanks to the amazing historical work of Francois Lepriere. He's the one who really pieced together this incredible story. A story about a mission that dared to stand up to the very institution it was meant to serve. Okay, so to really get why this whole experiment even happened, we have to picture the scene. We're going back to France right after World War II. And this was a country in crisis, a deep one. It wasn't just about money or rebuilding cities, it was a crisis of the soul.
And the scale of this problem? It was just immense. Think about this. In the 1950s, the industrial working class was almost a third of the entire population of France, a huge chunk of the country. And yet, almost all of them felt completely disconnected from the Catholic Church.
I mean, this divide was just massive. On one side, you had the church, which most people saw as this bourgeois, upper-class thing, totally disconnected from the real struggles of daily life. It was the institution of the powerful. And on the other side, you had the working class. They were living in a completely separate world, deeply suspicious of the church, and, for the most part, de-Christianized, which is just a fancy way of saying faith had almost no part in their lives. It was like a giant canyon that nobody knew how to cross.
So, you've got this radical problem. What do? You come up with a radical solution. The idea was to try and bridge that canyon by planting the church right in the middle of the world it had lost. And this is where the prêtres ouvriers, or worker priests, come in. The whole idea was simple, but at the time, absolutely revolutionary. These priests weren't going to preach from a fancy pulpit, no. They were going to share the life of the workers, 100%. They were going to become one of them, to really understand their world from the inside out.
And their method? It was all about total immersion. Step 1, you leave the comfortable parish and get a real tough job in a factory. Step 2, you live the same struggle on the same tiny paycheck in the same rundown housing. The whole point was to earn trust, not by shouting about the Bible, but just by being there. The thinking was only through that kind of real solidarity could you actually live out the gospel. But here's the thing. As this movement started to work, as these priests actually started earning the respect of their fellow workers, another institution started watching. And they were watching with a lot of suspicion. I'm talking about the Vatican.
You know, the core of this whole conflict really boils down to one simple, powerful observation. These are two worlds that do not speak the same language. You had the priests on the factory floor and the officials in Rome, and they were just living in completely different universes. And the group that was going to pass judgment on these worker priests, it was the Holy Office. Now you have to remember, this is the Cold War era. This powerful Vatican department was incredibly suspicious of anything that even smelled like communism or challenged the chain of command. Their number one job was to protect the purity of the faith, and they saw this whole experiment as a dangerous contamination waiting to happen. And just like that, the anonymous letters started flooding into Rome. The accusations were, well, they were pretty serious. These priests aren't converting anyone. They're becoming union agitators. They're starting to talk like Marxists. And this was the big one. They're blurring that sacred line between a priest and a regular person. The fear was that they were losing their special priestly identity.
So all these accusations, they're born out of fear, out of a total misunderstanding of what was happening on the ground. But they built up into this damning case. And eventually, Rome decided its authority, and the very idea of the priesthood was on the line. It was time to bring down the hammer, a final verdict with no chance of appeal.
And when the official ruling came down from the Vatican, the language was just cold, absolute. The worker-priest experiment was irrevocably condemned. That's it. End of story. No discussion, no appeal. And just like that, it was over. The mission that had become these men's entire reason for being was declared a total failure by people thousands of miles away who'd never set foot in a factory. The command was brutally specific. There was no wiggle room. By March 1st, every single one of them had to quit their job. They had to walk away from the people, the communities they'd become a part of. The ultimatum couldn't have been clearer. Abandon your mission, Go back to a normal priest's life in a parish or monastery or else.
So imagine this impossible choice. What do you do? Is your highest duty to the institution you swore an oath to? Or is it to the people you now see as your family, your flock, the people you'd basically be betraying if you just walked away?
From the institution's point of view, it was simple. As one superior warned them, Rome cannot and will never admit that its authority is defied. For the guys at the top, this was about one thing and one thing only: obedience. But for the priests actually living this life, it felt like a sick joke, a total betrayal of justice. They wrote this letter saying they'd been condemned without even knowing who accused them, or what they were even accused of. They called the whole system of secret letters a morbid growth that was making the church they loved ugly. But this story doesn't actually end there. The ruling was final, sure, but that crisis of conscience it created, it would echo for years and years. And it leaves us with this huge unresolved question. So yeah, the movement was officially killed, but dozens of these priests, they made their choice. They defied the order. They stayed in their jobs, right alongside their friends, the workers. They chose their mission, their conscience, over their careers in the church. And that's what their story leaves us with, this really profound question. When the rules of an institution clash with what an individual feels is their true mission, which way do you go? What does it actually mean to live a life of faith? The worker priests answered that question with their entire lives. And honestly, it's a question that's just as powerful for us to think about today.